Dr. Leah Santos had spent her life turning numbers into warnings. Temperature anomalies, precipitation forecasts, sea level rise projections, lines of code converted satellite feeds into graphs that she presented at conferences, each laced with more urgency than the last. Yet every time she uploaded a new dataset, the world outside her window seemed to grow louder with apathy. The noise of traffic, of commerce, of people rushing toward futures they did not believe were threatened, drowned out her carefully plotted alarms. So, when the International Glaciological Consortium offered a late winter berth at Camp Herdita, a fledgling outpost perched on the shoulder of a remote Patagonian ice field, she accepted without hesitating. There, they said, the glacier moved faster than models predicted. There, meltwater drilled impossible tunnels through blue ice. There, perhaps, she could gather proof dramatic enough to push hesitation off the policy tables back home. The flight south was turbulent, and Lyra gripped the armrests each time the small propeller plane shuddered. Anxiety had threaded itself through her chest for years, but lately it had become a near constant. She barely slept anymore. She dreamt of irreversible tipping points, of forests crisping into cinders, of her niece asking why no adults had listened soon enough. Anticipation of fieldwork usually steadied her. Data collection was concrete, measurable, but as she descended toward the wind-scoured runway, the hum refused to fade. At Camp Perdita, she met Teo, the station's sole technician, a lanky Chilean with wind-burned cheeks and a grin that implied he could fix anything with duct tape and sheer optimism. He stowed her duffels, then handed her a carved wooden whistle. "For luck," he said. "Blow it when the ice feels too big." Lyra managed a polite smile, but pocketed the whistle without testing it. She had outgrown toys, she told herself. She had work to do. The next morning, she followed a flagged route onto the glacier, sensors clanking in her pack. Wind combed the snow into ridges, and sunlight spilled across the ice like diluted sapphire. She surveyed stakes embedded last season. All had tilted downstream, indicating flow acceleration. Good, she thought, even as the word felt traitorous. Good evidence, good leverage. Around midday, she heard something she could not name, a murmuring beyond the usual creaks and groans of glacial movement. She paused, ice axe poised, and listened. The sound resembled wind in organ pipes, but gentler, as if someone coaxed chords from deep lungs of crystal. She turned her head, the tone shifted with her orientation, as though the glacier itself were a colossal instrument, and she had entered its resonant chamber. She marked the coordinates, intending to return with better audio equipment, but curiosity tugged her forward. A fissure yawned nearby, its sides polished translucent blue. From within, the melody pulsed slow arpeggios that rose, then resolved in aching minor thirds. Lyra knelt at the edge, heart rattling. The fissure was narrow, yet passable. Her harness and rope lay back at camp, but the craving to hear more pulled stronger than caution. Anxious climatologist, she mucked herself, flirting with headlines. Scientist falls into crevasse while chasing ghost music. She retreated, resumed her transect, but every stake she hammered rang discordant against the memory of those living chords. That night, wind battered the prefab modules. Lyra imported flow meter logs, but her gaze drifted to the handheld recorder in the corner of her desk. Teo knocked, bearing a mug of mate. "You look haunted," he said. "I heard something out there. Music." "Ah," he replied, as if people heard clandestine concerts all the time. "The glacier sings, old myth, the Kauesquar culture, Ixipei, mother of hollow bones. Do you believe that?" Teo shrugged. "Believe my ears, ice makes flutes if the wind asks nicely." Lyra laughed, despite herself. "I need to record it. Then we'll fetch your viento," he said, touching the whistle around her neck that she'd forgotten she was wearing. "Tomorrow?" She nodded. The hum in her chest modulated still tension, but now threaded with a fragile anticipation. They set out at dawn, roped together. Teo carried climbing gear, Lyra carried sensors, microphones, and the parabolic dish she used for distant storm acoustics. The morning air tasted of frost and pine resin, drifting from valleys far below. When they reached the fissure, the music had changed. Today, the glacier offered pizzicato plucks, like harp strings, punctuated by resonant booms. Teo anchored screws, and they descended 5 meters to a ledge where the ice widened into a vaulted corridor. Sunlight refracted through a skylight aperture, scattering rainbows. Lyra froze literally and figuratively. Before her, embedded along the corridor walls, were shapes so precise they mocked coincidence. Cylindrical tubes with finger holes, bulbous hollows like cello bodies, slender rods tapering to flared bells, all carved by meltwater and driven by wind coursing through interconnected vents. Drip water struck taut icicles strung across gaps, each icicle vibrating a perfect interval above the next. "The Tichi Pais Orchestra," Teo whispered. Lyra's recorder blinked red as she armed the channels. The microphones inhaled the aria of air and water, and for 30 minutes, neither researcher spoke. The glacier played itself, an ensemble authored by physics yet performed with deliberate tenderness. Soft whistles layered over deep percussive thuds, a sonic topography that mirrored the landscape outside. Listening, Lyra felt her perpetual anxiety loosen. She'd spent years confronting climate change's adversary, an avalanche of numbers threatening to bury humanity. But here, the melting ice was not only loss, it was voice. The glacier articulated its own witness, elegy, and instruction. She wondered whether sorrow could coexist with beauty in ways policy briefings never captured. Back at camp, she uploaded the files and ran spectral analyses. The frequency distribution was uncanny. Overtones aligned with harmonic series typical of wooden instruments, despite originating in frozen cavities. She drafted a paper outline titled Aeolian Instrumentation in Rapidly Receding Glacial Fissures. But the academic phrasing felt anemic compared to her awe. Night fell, and she could not sleep. She replayed the recording on loop. The chords swelled, then resolved in a cadence that nudged tears from her eyes. She remembered childhood Saturdays practicing cello in her grandmother's apartment, how the low register vibrated through the floorboards, how musical phrases felt like speaking without risking misunderstanding. She had abandoned the cello during grad school, exchanging sonatas for scatterplots. Now the glacier reminded her that data and music both sought resonance, one with intellect, the other with feeling. The next week became ritual. At first light, Lyra and Teo trekked to Ixipei's corridor. Each day the score had evolved. Warmer temperatures opened new vents, nighttime refreezing thickened others. Sections collapsed, birthing fresh timbres. Lyra mapped the cavities with laser scanners, fine-tuned microphone arrays, even placed geophones to capture subsonic rumbles. She logged everything: airspeed, temperature gradients, humidity, melt rates, acoustic spectra. Yet every evening when she composed field notes, she slipped between scientific precision and lyrical astonishment. March 12, instrument cluster beta dissolved, resultant drip rhythm now in 5/4 time. March 14, found flute-like appendage tuned to B-flat aircraft contrails amplified pitch, need further tests. March 15, is the glacier improvising? Patterns resemble call and response. The anxious hum inside her chest thinned with each entry. She was still afraid, the data showed. The glacier retreating at nearly a meter per day, but fear no longer paralyzed her. It motivated listening more carefully, documenting more thoroughly, loving more fiercely what she would inevitably lose. News of the sonic anomaly reached headquarters. They requested live streams. They demanded daily status updates. They hinted at media partnerships. Teo joked about selling concert tickets. Lyra bristled. Publicity risked hordes of tourists trampling the fragile ice. But she also recognized potential. If the world would not heed graphs, perhaps it would heed a symphony of vanishing ice. A satellite uplink was arranged. On equinox evening, Lyra positioned a stereo pair of high-sensitivity microphones, then stepped aside as the wind began its set. Across the globe, hundreds tuned in, professors in climate departments, journalists hungry for fresh angles, school children whose teachers projected the feed onto smartboards. The glacier did not disappoint. Over 45 minutes, it spun motifs, reminiscent of whale song braided with wind chimes. Near the finale, a low vibrato emerged from water, pushing through a narrowing tunnel, she would later determine, that grounded the melody in somber majesty. Comments scrolled across the consortium's portal. Hauntingly beautiful, I had goosebumps, never felt climate change in my ears before. Afterward, Lyra read the comments until tears blurred her screen. She had wanted the world to listen. They were listening now. But fame invited scrutiny. Internet skeptics accused her of synthesizer trickery. Political trolls mocked crybaby scientists playing ice flutes while asking for grants. The hum returned, tinged with new disquiet. 2 days later, a warm front arrived. Temperatures soared 7 degrees. Lyra and Tio hiked to the corridor, but halfway there they heard fissures snapping like gunshots. The glacier groaned, a wounded animal badgered by heat. They roped up sooner than usual, each footstep testing for hidden voids. When they reached the skylight, vapor veiled the interior, and the music had shifted toward frenetic, dissonant clatter. Teo frowned. "She's panicked!" Lyra set a single omnidirectional mic. "No time for a raise!" Suddenly, the corridor's ceiling cracked, sending shards cascading. Teo shoved her against the wall as ice spears exploded around them. The music spiked in pitch, then cut to silence, as if a bowstring snapped. "We need to leave," Teo said. His voice trembled. They scrambled up the rope. Behind them, the corridor collapsed with a sound like a gong smothered in snow. On the surface, sun glare burned white. Lyra glanced back once, steam billowed from the skylight's corpse. The orchestra hall was gone. At camp, she downloaded the recording. The final minutes captured crescendo, then fracture, climax, then cessation. She listened on loop until dawn, chest tight with grief. She recalled coral bleaching, forest die-offs, species vanishing before names were assigned. The glacier had offered a masterpiece and then broken its instruments. She had witnessed beauty, now she faced silence. She opened her project folder. 86 gigabytes of audio, terabytes of imaging, pages of field notes, enough for several studies, for press releases, for maybe, finally, action. Yet the thought of distilling the experience into abstracts and bullet points felt like draining color from a rainbow. She closed the laptop and walked outside. Stars, crisp and reckless, flared above the ice field. Wind skimmed across ridges, whispering faint remnants. She remembered the whistle Teo gave her. She hadn't tried it yet. She raised it to her lips and blew softly. A clear tone emerged, pure, unwavering. Nothing like the glacier's complicated polyphony, yet born of the same air. The single note floated out, met mountains, mingled with starlight, and disappeared. She exhaled. The hum eased. Next morning, she called a remote press briefing. Commercial blinked from New York, Berlin, Sao Paulo. She wore her field jacket, hair still braided from helmet duty. "I'm Dr. Lyra Santos," she began. "I study ice because it holds Earth's memory. This season, I heard that memories speak in music. I will share the data, the recordings, the analyses. But before numbers, I want you to listen." She cued a track, the glacier's gentle March 9 lullaby. Journalists muted themselves. Many closed their eyes. When the piece ended, she spoke again. "What you heard no longer exists. A heat wave destroyed those cavities 2 days ago. The instruments melted. Their song is now archived. The glacier will continue to change until we change. My colleagues will publish the technical details, but please remember what cannot be graphed. How it felt inside your chest." Questions erupted. She answered patiently, weaving statistics with sensory narrative. She invoked her niece, who danced to the glacier's recording before bedtime. She quoted the Quagwar phrase Teo taught her, "Igleng isiwi, keep the bone mother whole." Afterwards, she expected exhaustion. Instead, she felt lighter. She realized she had shifted from chronic dread to active mourning, a step closer to action. Mourning acknowledged loss, but also compelled preservation of what remained. Over the following weeks, the story spread. Radio stations aired snippets between pop songs. Podcasters dissected acoustic physics of ice flutes. Environmental NGOs spliced her briefing into fundraising campaigns. An orchestral composer in Oslo requested permission to arrange the recordings into a requiem. Lyra granted all rights freely, stipulating only that any usage include the glacier's name and real-time climate statistics. Meanwhile, she continued fieldwork. The warm front passed. Colder nights refroze surfaces into brittle plates. She and Teo found new fissures, smaller, less ornate, but still capable of tone when wind aligned. They mapped these too, cautious yet hopeful. One afternoon, they reached a basin where melt water pooled above ancient moraine. Lyra paused, hearing faint rhythmic splashes. She followed the sound to a low arch and discovered drip patterns echoing like hand drums. The cavity shapes were crude compared to Texipei's orchestra, but they offered something else. Possibility. The glacier had not stopped speaking. It had simply changed instruments. She set a recorder in the basin, then climbed onto a boulder and closed her eyes. Drips tapped, wind hissed, distant avalanches rumbled bass. She recognized the motif from earlier recordings, but slower, deeper, an adagio after the allegro collapse. Nature was composing in real time, improvising around damage. Teo joined her on the boulder. "New ensemble. he said. Second movement, she replied. His laughter rang across the basin. Maybe the finale is happier than we think. Maybe finales are just transitions, she said. The idea surprised her, but felt true. That night, she emailed her niece an MP3 titled glacier_sweet_movement to WAC. The reply came minutes later. Aunt Lyra, it's like the ice is breathing. I played it during homework and felt calm. Thank you for letting me hear hope. Lyra read the line again, hear hope. She realized that was what had eluded her in spreadsheets. Hope has a frequency, a texture, an acoustic presence. People could tune to it if offered the chance. Spring advanced. Camp Perdita prepared to close for the season, but the consortium granted Lyra funding for a semi-autonomous acoustic station. She and Tio installed solar panels, wind turbines, an array of waterproof microphones, and temperature probes. The system would stream real-time audio alongside climatic data to an open website, icelisten.dr. They programmed alerts. If the glacier's music spiked in volume or frequency, subscribers would receive notifications, not unlike storm warnings or concert invitations. On the final day, Lyra stood at the airstrip, duffels packed, headphones around her neck. The tiny plane idled, propellers churning cold air. She delayed boarding long enough to open the Ice Listen feed on her tablet. The stream carried gentle harmonic sighs. Overlaid text displayed the current temperature, albedo, and flow velocity. At the bottom flashed a quote she had chosen, listen then act. She pressed record on her personal field mic and let the plane's engines syncopate with the glacier. As she climbed the steps, she smiled. Anxiety still lived inside her. It would, as long as the planet's fever raged. But it was no longer solitary. It was fused with melody, with communal listening, with a promise that bearing witness is itself an action. The aircraft lifted, banking over the ice field. From above, crevasses stitched luminous threads through the expanse. She imagined each thread vibrating, sounding notes no instrument maker could replicate. She imagined people around the world pausing midday to tune in, to remember that ice breathes and that breath is not infinite. In her headphones, the glacier whispered farewell, a single sustained chord, half lament, half lullaby. Lyra pressed her palm to the window. We hear you, she said to the receding white below, and we're not done singing back.